and welcome to my presentation, Experiences of Pet Bereavement. My name is Bethan and I'm currently studying for an MSc in Counselling at Bangor University. I was interested in researching experiences of pet bereavement because, having had lots of cats and dogs over the years, I've experienced a close bond between humans and animals and have also grieved when they died. I'm grateful to one of our interviewees who kindly gave me a picture of her little dog who died in his sleep at the grand old age of 20. And here's an extract of a poem which her friend wrote for her. Farewell, dear friend, true to the end, so clear in my heart, where you'll remain always loved and clearly missed. So it is for many. The heartbreak following the death of a pet can be as overwhelming as the grief experienced following the death of a family member or close friend. And yet, still people will say, never mind, you can get another dog. Don't be silly, it's only a rabbit. But it's only a cat. For the bereaved pet owner, this lack of understanding doesn't help them to come to terms with their grief or encourage them to share their distress and pain. This is disenfranchised grief, and it can lead to a risk of clinically significant depression. Bereavement support is available for people suffering the loss of a family member or friend. Society recognises the need for grief counselling and support. Why should this not be available to grieving pet owners? Is it? And if it is, do they know about it? Is their grief similar to when we mourn a family member? These are some of the questions which drew me to this research project. Why do funerals often include a poem, Weep Not For Me, which Constance Jenkins wrote for her sister after the death of her beloved cat? Are the feelings so similar? If they are, should we not be including pet bereavement as a valid reason for therapeutic support? In many ways, it's surprising that the depth of the human-animal bond is still underestimated. History, myths and legends, stories, films, paintings, newspaper articles are full of examples. Llewellyn and his faithful dog Gellert, Lassie Come Home, Marley and Me. Indeed, we know that since the beginning of civilization, companion animals have had a unique relationship with human beings. Ancient Egyptians kept cats as pets, and the discovery of a 14,000-year-old skeleton with its hands wrapped around the skeleton of a dog shows that human-animal bonding is not a recent thing. It is a relationship that has evolved over the centuries, from work-orientated to companion-orientated. It can embody a level of attachment founded in love, which can contribute to the emotional well-being of owners and their families. Pets are described as man's best friend, the visible soul of a home, my baby. So the issue of pet bereavement is a serious one, and in our research, which is exploratory, we wanted to find out more about the human-pet bond, grief and bereavement following the loss of a pet, coping strategies, impact of different types of loss on the bereavement, and pet bereavement support. This was an empirical research project. We used a mixed methods design, quantitative and qualitative. For the quantitative, questionnaires were analysed using descriptive statistics and ANOVA to compare differences between groups. For qualitative, we undertook a thematic analysis of interviews. Ethics, our research gained ethical approval from Bangor University Ethics Committee and followed the BACP and BPS frameworks for ethical research and practice. Participation was voluntary and participants were recruited following a poster advertising the project on social media, Sona and at veterinary surgeries in Bangor and the Pet Cemetery in Holywell. Participants were provided with an information sheet, consent form, debrief statement, support services. Quantitative data was gathered from an online questionnaire using Qualtrics software. This began with a series of demographic questions, followed by questions about the pet. Participants confirmed they were over 18, resident in the UK, had experienced pet bereavement, what kind of pet they had, the age of the pet, and the nature of the loss. To explore experiences of pet loss, we were very grateful for permission to include the Hunt and Padilla Pet Bereavement Questionnaire, developed at the Department of Psychology, University of Pennsylvania, for use in studies of the psychological impact of losing a pet in America. In fact, it was evident that most of the research to date on pet bereavement is from the USA. Qualitative data was gathered following a thematic analysis of interviews conducted online, on Teams or Zoom. Interviews were transcribed and translated from Welsh, repeated patterns noted and themes identified. Here is some of the descriptive data from the quantitative research. Total number of participants was 160, 77.9% were female. Largest group were 18 to 30-year-olds and the oldest was 71. 51.2% had lost a dog, 25% had lost a cat, and other pets listed were rabbits, horses, fish, hamsters, gerbils, and a rat. The most frequent type of loss was 28.7% from old age and 26.3% from illness. 23.8% had been euthanized for health reasons and 0.6% because of aggression. 50% of pets died between 1 and 5 years ago, and 21.3% between 5 and 10 years ago. And 97.5% of participants did not know of any support services. ANOVA testing of this data showed no significant effect on the grief of participants based on participants' age, no significant effect on the grief of participants based on the type of pet. Participants felt significantly more anger based on the age of their pet, and participants experienced significantly more acceptance when the pet was older. Participants felt significantly more supported when their pet died at an older age compared to a younger pet. The type of loss data included the most common type of loss, which was euthanasia, either for health or behavioural reasons. There was no significant effect of total grief or anger felt by participants based on the type of loss experienced, and participants' total guilt was significantly higher based on the type of loss. The qualitative research now, interviewees. 12 interviewees were randomly selected from participants who'd indicated in the online questionnaire that they'd like to share their own experiences of pet bereavement with us. 10 interviews were in English and 2 in Welsh, and they lasted roughly an hour each. Clearly, the subject matter was emotional, and as researchers, we were prepared for this, to respond with empathy and, if necessary, to offer further signposting. Analysis of the transcribed interviews resulted in these 4 main themes, which significantly are similar to themes included in models and frameworks relating to human bereavement, for example, Kubler-Ross and Bowlby. From this framework of 4 themes, sub-themes were also identified in the thematic analysis. So the main themes are attachment, death, grief, and support. Attachment. I loved him dearly. He was to be honest, he was my best friend. The depth of attachment between the owner and their pet will influence the depth of grief. Similarly, when a family member or friend whom you love dies, the grief hurts and can be prolonged. The closer the attachment with another, the more likely they will experience grief. The goal of attachment behavior is to maintain a bond of affection and love. When this bond is broken by death and the loss is so great, the behavioural response of grief is intensified. And our interviewees concur. For example, the loss of a pet is just as important as the loss of a loved one, because it is a loved one. It's still a loved one. I lost my shadow when he died. They're your safe space. They're your comfort. They're just dogs at the end of the day. They didn't suffer. They had a good life. You know, they gave us pleasure. We all had fun, and like now, it's time to move on. They were very important members of our family. The love I felt for him swelled up even more in a way because I was completely responsible for him. Death. The type of loss, the way in which the animal dies, inevitably affects the owner. It's a loss, and it's a big loss. I broke my heart. I did a lot of crying on my own in private, because I still had this thing in my head. He was a dog. He was a dog. Other people are suffering. You try to put perspective, but the emotion was greater than that, of course. This was during the time of COVID, when so many people were dying. Euthanasia. Euthanasia is the process of humanely inducing death in an animal that is terminally ill or presenting severe behavioural problems. I wasn't too bad, I think, because I knew it was happening and I knew that she was very unwell. The attachment that someone has to the animal maybe helps you to make a decision because of the love that you have towards the animal. Choosing euthanasia, which was the most common reason for death in our study, can be very difficult for the owner who loves the pet and doesn't want it to die, and the potential for feelings of guilt, anger, regret, and a complex grief response following the decision is great. This was the case for many of our interviewees. I've always felt with every cat that I've had to put to sleep like that I've kept them maybe a week or a few days longer than I should have. Natural causes. I didn't want to put him down. He wasn't suffering and he died of old age and he went in his sleep and he had a good life, and that's what's important. He's not with me anymore, but if he might be with me in spirit, who knows? Dying peacefully of old age is more easy to accept, but animals also die suddenly from ill health or in an accident, and this also can be devastating. The shock and the upset, the relationship, I suppose, that could have been. Ambiguous loss refers to events where the pet is lost, stolen, or has run away, and leads to unresolved grief which can have long-lasting effects on the resilience of the owner. Many pets were stolen during the COVID pandemic when everyone wanted a dog, and though this was not reported in our study, it was a serious problem. Grief. The human grief response is generally described as having phases or stages, which are not linear in time, but understanding them can help the bereaved to cope with their grief. Again, as with the main themes, there are parallels between these sub-themes of grief experienced after the loss of a family member and those described by bereaved pet owners, and so the grief theme has the following sub-themes. Shock. It was pure shock, and I think I wailed. I was completely crushed. Anger. It was mainly anger. Resentment and guilt. I felt a bit bad that I hadn't noticed how bad it must have been. Depression. I was just crying constantly. She did really help when I was going through problems with my mental health, because she was just this warm presence that was always going to be there. A really big grounding effect. I miss him. I haven't had another dog since, because I don't think I can manage having a dog. It's too traumatic. And acceptance. I was like, this is sad. I'm allowed to stay in bed and cry for a day or more. And that was kind of a major thing that actually helped me get over it. I had him buried and I've got loads of memories, and the memories will stay with me. And that's what's important to me. Disenfranchised grief comes from a failure in empathy when societal constraints prevent one part of society from understanding the meaning and experience of another, leading to the invalidation of the other, in this case the bereaved owner's sense of loss. It can initially intensify the process of bereavement and increase negative emotional reactions and depression. Pet owners are ashamed and embarrassed by their grief. You want somebody to say to you, of course it's not silly. It's been a part of your life for 14 years. You want that reassurance. And finally, support. Not many participants in this study were aware of any support. Most felt the vet had supported them well, and then they dealt with their grief alone or with family members. Just giving yourself space and time and talking about it and making sure that you do have a support system that is there for you if you need them. When you've lost a pet, you kind of feel like you've lost a human relative. Our research has shown that pet loss-related bereavement is a serious problem. The parallels with human bereavement are clear. Access to support, as our data shows, is limited, either because the services are so few and far between, online, or people don't know about them. There is a need for specialist pet bereavement support counselling services, as well as an awareness from counsellors who may have no interest or affinity with pets, to accept the genuine grief and sadness felt by those who have lost their best friend. It's interesting to note that prolonged grief disorder is the newest disorder to be added to the DSM-5, released in March 2022, for people who are still grieving 6 months to a year after experiencing a loss. Are there hallmark systems of yearning or preoccupation with the deceased and dying relevant only to those mourning the death of a person? Or could it be the old man I see walking the fields with an empty space beside him? He's always close to tears, talking about his dog 6 months on. Shortly after the dog had been put to sleep, he asked me, when would the funeral be? He wanted to be there. I gently explained that there'd be no funeral. He'd need to go to the vet's to collect a box of the dog's ashes. Owners who may be lonely, ill, elderly, isolated, and lacking in emotional fulfillment may have such a strong attachment to and an overdependence on their pet that the loss of this beloved friend can lead to devastating grief. The death of the pet can lead to depression, deterioration in mental and physical health, and suicide, the owner suffering as if they had lost a husband, wife, or child. And these may be the very people that this research couldn't reach, because access to the questionnaire and interview was online, and this is a significant limitation. For those who were able to participate, the overall impression was that talking about the loss of their pet to a complete stranger was a positive, meaningful experience. And though revisiting sad memories, the process was therapeutic. And this is a take-home message to fellow counsellors. We're very grateful to everyone who took part, and in particular our 12 interviewees, for sharing their emotional stories and personal feelings with us. As one interviewee said, I think it's lovely that I was able to talk about him again. I think it's really lovely. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please email me at the address shown below. Diolch yn fawr.